Hey guys, Dr. Tipton here. Thanks for joining me again for another episode of my YouTube channel, Long Live the Brains. Today I'm going to take a step back and give you an update on where I'm at in my training and kind of what the next steps are. So I started out Long Live the Brains with some videos entitled why I wanted to become a neurologist and what is a neurologist, and gave a little bit of background on myself, but I think now is a good time to provide you with an update. So I'm just a refresher. I'm a resident. I'm the chief resident and about to graduate next week, actually. So the path that got me to here really began back a long time ago. I told you about my motivation behind becoming a neurologist was that my grandfather had Parkinson's disease, and I really over time developed kind of a fascination with the brain and the nervous system. And then when I was in college, I actually started out as a music major and then switched over to pre-med. And that's usually what people do when they decide that they want to go, the route of medicine. And pre-med for me really just meant that I had courses in college that kind of prepared me for the exam that you have to take that medical schools look at when they're determining whether or not they want to accept you. That's called the MCAT. So my major in college was actually biochemistry and cellular molecular biology, and I got an honors degree in that. But part of that coursework kind of fit under the umbrella of pre-med. So graduated from college and actually took the MCAT and didn't do well on it, which was a tough awakening for me because up to that point, things had been going really well in school. I was making the grades. I was volunteering at hospitals. I was working. I worked at a couple of hospitals in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I was doing my undergraduate studies. Everything just kind of made sense. It's like you graduate college, the next step, med school, no big deal. But I didn't get in the first time, and that was really tough for me to swallow. So I had to figure out what the next steps were going to be. I graduated from University of Tennessee in Knoxville with the degree that I just mentioned, as well as a minor in music in May of 2009. And I had some time on my hands because I wasn't going directly into med school. But fortunately, I was able to work in at University of Tennessee Medical Center as a volunteer in a memory clinic. And it was at this memory clinic that I began to meet people with Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia and many different forms of dementia. And I got to work with a great neurologist, Dr. Doherty, and got to see him perform the exam on patients and see his interactions with this patient population. And I really developed a passion for folks with dementia and cognitive impairment, and really fell in love with the neurologic examination. The ability to walk into a room and talk to a patient, to put your hands on the patient to examine them, and then be able to come up with some kind of meaningful conclusion of what might be going on without necessarily ordering a bunch of tests. Even though we do order tests, you get to walk out of the room after the exam and you have an idea of what's going on. And that was something that I found really attractive to the field of neurology. So the stage was being set for me to go into something within kind of neuroscience. So while I was working at it was the Cole Neuroscience Center at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, I actually got a call from one of the investigators at the National Institutes of Health and asked me if I wanted to interview for a post-baccalaureate fellowship, which is basically, it's kind of a 1 to 2 year position that you can do at the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, in Washington, D.C., in research. And I did the interview and took the job, and within 3 weeks was actually living in Washington, D.C. and working as a post-baccalaureate fellow. In the lab there, I was doing experiments on mouse models and rat models, where I was looking at their brains, and I was actually able to measure electrical activity in the neurons within their brains and understand about the relationship between different brain cells and how application of different drugs can affect how those cells behave. And so I started to gain kind of another point of view of neuroscience, which was really the basic science, the electrophysiology, really the nitty-gritty of how the circuit is set up. And so that was almost a separate passion, even though it was kind of under the umbrella of neuroscience. Earlier at the Cole Neuroscience Research Center, I developed kind of the passion for the patient population. And then at the NIH, I really started to gain an appreciation and a passion for the complexities of the nervous system and how it works together to make us who we are. During that time, I was also studying again for the MCAT and ended up taking it 3 times, which if you know me, I'm a perfectionist, type A to the point, and it's hard to say that I had to do something 3 times to get it good enough. But it was something that I did, and I remember right after I took the MCAT the 3rd time, I remember speaking with my mom on the phone, and I was working at the NIH. I was sitting down in the lobby and of the building that I worked in, and she said, "Philip, you've taken this exam now 3 times, and you didn't get into med school the first time. How, at what point do you think that we need to take this as a sign that maybe you need to consider something else? What are you going to do if you don't get into med school this time?" And I said, I thought about it for a moment, and then I said, "I'm just going to keep applying." And it was at that point that I made the decision that going into medicine was something that I had to do. I felt like it was my calling, and that there wasn't an obstacle that was going to keep me from being able to reach that goal. Fortunately, it wasn't all that long after that conversation that I received my acceptance letter of the school that I wanted to go to. I ended up going to East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee. It's only about 2 hours, depending on how fast you drive, about 2 hours away from Knoxville, where all my family lived. And East Tennessee State, the Quillen College of Medicine, was a great place to go for medical school. And it was during that time of medical school, which was 4 years. And I should kind of step aside for a minute. Remember, medical school, there's basically 2 flavors. In the United States, you've got an MD program and you've got a DO program. They're both going to be 4 years, and at the end, you're a doctor. So my experience was at an MD school, and during that time as a medical student, you spend a lot of time in the classroom, especially in the first 2 years. And then you're kind of released into the clinics, and you start to get a feel for what these different specialties look like. So you do different rotations in internal medicine and OBGYN and family medicine and surgery. And I was able to do a few electives in neurology. And it was in medical school, I kind of knew I wanted to do something with neuroscience, but there are a few things that you could do. You could be a neuroradiologist, where you read scans of like the brain and the spinal cord, or you could be a neurosurgeon, where you're actually working in an operating room, where you go into people's skulls and work on their brains, or work on their spinal cords, or work on their nerves, or you could be a neurologist. One of the things that medical students always have to do is, you want to figure out what you want to do, but sometimes the way of getting there is by the process of elimination. And so I started checking things off the list. And no offense to other specialties, but there were a lot of them that I was very quick to check them off the list. It just wasn't something that interested me. It wasn't something that I felt like my passion was going to be fueled by going into. So we get to the neuroscience options. And I thought back to my time at the Cole Neuroscience Center and how special those interactions were with my patients. And I realized that I wasn't going to be fulfilled if I went into neuroradiology. Even though it dealt with neuroscience, if I was in front of a computer and reading those scans without the patient interaction that I needed, that I wasn't going to be fulfilled. So I kind of checked neuroradiology off the box. And no offense to neuroradiology at all, I highly value the colleagues that I get to work with that are in neuroradiology, but I'm glad that they went into it and not me. So then that left me between kind of neurosurgery and neurology. And, you know, there are different ways of making this decision. For me, I looked at where the problem solving was taking place primarily. And the way that I viewed it as a medical student was, you know, back to what I said about, you know, being able to walk into the room and place your hands on the patient and, you know, do an exam to take samples of the nervous system and figure out where, or localize, as we say, localize where in the nervous system the problem is. And then, you know, formulate a treatment plan. And I did electives in both neurology and neurosurgery, and what I realized was that it seemed to me that the majority of the problem solving that the neurosurgeons were doing was really in the operating room. It wasn't with the patient, you know, interacting. It was in the operating room with the patient sedated and doing some sort of procedure, some tactile procedure. And I like doing procedures, but what I found to be more in line with my passion was doing the problem solving in the room with the patient at the bedside, and just as I mentioned earlier, with the exam and being able to come up with a treatment plan and being able to follow my patients and see how they do, develop relationships with them, and whatever issue they're dealing with, whether it's a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's disease, or whether it's a peripheral neuropathy that you might get with, say, diabetes, being able to walk along their journey with them and help them. So through that kind of decision-making process, I decided to apply for a neurology residency. So that's what you do at the end of medical school. You apply again, and you're applying for residency programs, and they can come in different lengths depending on which specialty you choose. Neurology happens to be a 4-year residency program where your first year is actually you're an intern in internal medicine, and then years 2, 3, and 4 are in neurology, strictly neurology. And so right now, I am in the 4th year, the very end of my 4th year of neurology residency. And after you graduate residency, you can go straight into practice and practice independently. Or some people will choose to further their training with fellowships. And in fact, that's what I'm going to be doing. I've actually been accepted for a few different fellowships. So in July of this year, 2019, I'm going to start a fellowship in behavioral neurology here at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. And behavioral neurology, you think, what's that? Well, it kind of sounds like, you know, people misbehaving or something like that. It's kind of a misnomer title. I like to think of it as behavioral/cognitive neurology, because we're dealing with cognition and how you interact with your environment. And there's a lot of crossover with like neuropsychiatry, but cognitive neurology or behavioral neurology deals largely in patients with dementia. So those very first patients that helped me to develop my passion and appreciation for neurology and the neurological exam, those are the types of patients that I'm going to be seeing during my behavioral neurology residency, or excuse me, behavioral neurology fellowship. After that 1-year fellowship, I'm going to be moving with my wife and daughter and dog up to Rochester, Minnesota, to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and I'll be doing a movement disorders fellowship. Now that's dealing with diseases like Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, all varieties of tremor, and several other movement disorders as well. And then after that fellowship, I'll be returning to Jacksonville to the Mayo Clinic again for a 2-year research fellowship. And this research fellowship is going to focus on really the overarching goal is to find connections between genotypes or genetic mutations and phenotypes or the clinical manifestations of disease. Now, that's kind of the basis of all of the genetic studies that we have going on right now. But what I want to do is to dig into what we call sort of deeper phenotype. So what do I mean by that? Well, phenotype, again, it's the outward manifestation of a disease. And I talked a little bit about that in some of the genetics videos earlier in Long Live the Brains. But let's take Parkinson's disease, for example. So with Parkinson's disease, as we've talked about, a resting tremor, you can spot that from across the room. And there have been studies that have looked to see, are there genetic associations with patients with Parkinson's, specifically those that have tremor? And, you can do that. But what if we dug in deeper and said, well, what else can we measure about this? We could measure the amplitude of the tremor, or how fast the tremor is oscillating, and different vectors about it. And what if finding those really nitty-gritty elements of the phenotype would allow us to uncover genetic associations that we would otherwise miss, because we're not measuring as precisely as we can. So my philosophy is that if there's something that you can measure, you should measure it. And so that's really the overarching goal of what I'm wanting to accomplish with my research fellowship. So it's kind of funny. I think my education has been in sort of 4-year chunks. I had 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and now it's going to be 4 years of fellowship training. But it's the next step, and it's all moving in the direction of where my passion is. Thanks for tuning in again for another episode of my YouTube channel, Long Live the Brains. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also click the notifications bell so that you're notified every time I upload a new video. The content for these videos is based on your feedback. So if you liked today's video, click the thumbs up icon, or post a comment with questions or suggestions about future topics you'd like to see. I want to know what you want to know. Now, I'm also on social media at Twitter and Instagram at Philip Tipton MD, and you can go there to find more neuroscience related content. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.